Cosimo Barbieri expected his Tribeca penthouse to be empty and silent. Instead, the most ruthless mafia boss in New York found the woman he secretly obsessed over weeping on his mattress. He stepped forward to comfort her until he saw the crimson soaking her silk dress. The blood was not hers. The rain over Manhattan did nothing to wash away the sins of the city, and Cosimo Barbieri carried more of those sins than anyone else. As the head of the Barbieri crime family, Cosimo ruled the 5 boroughs with an iron fist and a cold, calculating mind. He was a man who ordered executions over morning espresso and dismantled rival syndicates with terrifying precision. To the world, he was a monster shaped like a man, clad in bespoke Italian suits and wrapped in absolute authority. But every monster has a weakness, a single vulnerability they guard with their life. For Cosimo, that weakness was Isabella Coppola. Isabella was never meant to be involved in the blood-soaked mechanics of the underworld. She was the daughter of a fallen family, a brilliant archivist and financial auditor who legitimized Cosimo's vast wealth through high-end art galleries and real estate acquisitions. In a society that prized razor-sharp edges and starved superficial beauty, Isabella was a breathtaking contrast. She was softly curved, a stunning, plus-sized woman whose lush figure and gentle demeanor made the hardened criminals around her severely underestimate her. Cosimo, however, saw every facet of her. He was utterly consumed by her, harboring a dark, possessive obsession that he fought daily to suppress. He kept her at arm's length, isolating her in his fortified penthouse, believing that distance was the only way to protect her from the brutal reality of his life. He had just returned from a disastrous sit-down in a warehouse near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Corrado Moretti, the psychotic and wildly ambitious leader of the Moretti Syndicate, had openly threatened the fragile peace of the city. Corrado was a rabid dog, hungering for the territory Cosimo controlled, and the meeting had ended with veiled threats of violence. Cosimo's mind was racing with strategies to eradicate the Moretti problem as he stepped out of his private elevator and walked into his bedroom and froze. Isabella was curled at the edge of his massive, king-sized bed. Her shoulders shook with violent sobs, her hands buried in her face. But it was not the sound of her crying that made Cosimo's heart stop. It was the dress. The emerald green evening gown he had purchased for her just weeks ago was completely ruined, saturated with a horrific amount of fresh, sticky blood. A primal, blinding rage erupted inside Cosimo. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his mind already declaring a merciless war on whoever had dared to touch his queen. He fell to his knees beside the bed, his large, calloused hand gently but urgently grasping her shoulders. He pulled her hands away from her face, frantically searching her skin for the source of the bleeding. She looked up at him, her beautiful face pale and streaked with tears, but as Cosimo inspected her throat, her arms and her torso, a startling realization washed over him. There were no wounds. Not a single scratch marred her flawless skin. Cosimo stared at the heavy crimson stains soaking the fabric of her dress, then looked down at her delicate hands, which were coated in drying red. The air in the room grew completely still. The blood was not hers. Isabella took a ragged, shuddering breath, her dark eyes locking onto his. The facade of the soft, helpless civilian began to fracture, revealing something incredibly resilient underneath. She did not look away as she spoke, her voice shaking, but carrying a shocking undertone of steel. She told him everything, Corrado Moretti had not waited for their meeting to conclude before making his move. He had sent his top enforcer, a hulking assassin named Vance, to the charity gala Isabella was attending. The plan was obvious: kidnap Cosimo's prized accountant, torture her for the financial access codes, and use her broken body as leverage to bring the Barbieri family to its knees. Vance had cornered her in a secluded coat check room, locking the door behind them. He had looked at her lush, soft body and laughed, assuming she would simply faint from fear. That was Corrado's fatal mistake. What no one in the New York underworld knew, not even Cosimo, was that before the Coppola family was systematically slaughtered a decade ago, Isabella's father had taught her how to survive. He had forged her soft exterior into the perfect camouflage. Isabella confessed to Cosimo that she had not screamed. When Vance reached for her, expecting easy prey, she had utilized a hidden skill she had prayed never to use. She had slipped a titanium ceramic letter opener from her evening clutch. Using his own forward momentum and her surprisingly lethal knowledge of human anatomy, she had driven the blade directly upward, severing his brachial and carotid arteries in one fluid, brutal motion. She had held him down as he bled out onto the floor, making sure he could not call for backup. She was crying, she explained, not because she was traumatized by the violence, but because she feared she had ruined Cosimo's fragile peace treaty. She thought he would look at her in disgust, seeing a killer instead of the gentle woman he had tried to protect. Cosimo listened in absolute silence. The tension in his jaw relaxed, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering awe. The blood on her dress changed everything. It shattered the illusion that she was a fragile glass doll, needing constant protection. The woman sitting on his bed was a survivor, a predator clad in emerald silk, a queen completely capable of reigning over the ashes of his enemies. His obsession, already a roaring fire, turned into sheer worship. Cosimo reached out, ignoring the blood that transferred to his crisp white cuffs, and cupped her face. His thumb gently wiped away a stray tear. He did not yell. He did not recoil. Instead, the most dangerous man on the East Coast leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. He told her that there was no peace treaty to ruin, that Corrado was already a dead man walking, and that she was the most magnificent creature he had ever laid eyes on. He led her gently into the master bathroom, a cavernous space of black marble and gold fixtures. He stripped off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. With a tenderness that would have terrified his underlings, Cosimo helped her peel away the ruined, blood-soaked dress. He did not avert his gaze from her curves. Instead, he looked at her with a raw, unfiltered reverence, making sure she felt his absolute adoration. He drew a warm bath, adding expensive oils to wash away the scent of copper and death. As she slipped into the water, Cosimo knelt by the edge of the oversized tub. He took a soft cloth and painstakingly washed the blood from her hands, her arms, and her chest. The juxtaposition of his brutal reputation and this act of quiet devotion hung heavily in the steamy air. He murmured praises to her, validating her strength and reinforcing that she was safe, that she had done exactly what she needed to do to survive. Once the shock began to recede, Isabella's true brilliance surfaced. As Cosimo wrapped her in a thick, heated robe, she looked at him with clear, focused eyes and revealed the rest of her evening's work. She had not simply killed Vance and fled in a panic. Her mind, trained to unravel complex financial webs, had immediately shifted into tactical overdrive. She explained that she had taken Vance's encrypted burner phone, using her high-level access to the Gala's administrative network. She had logged into the security mainframe and wiped the camera footage of the coat check corridor, replacing it with a continuous 30-minute loop. Then she had sent a coded message from Vance's phone to Corrado Moretti, stating that the package was secured, but they were being pursued by the Russian Bratva. She had purposefully routed the GPS signal of the phone to a moving garbage truck heading deep into Brighton Beach, effectively sending Corrado's backup teams straight into heavily armed Russian territory. Cosimo stood frozen, the towel in his hands dropping to the floor. The sheer logistical genius of her actions left him completely speechless. She had not just eliminated Corrado's best man. She had framed a rival syndicate, bought them hours of untraceable time, and initiated a potential gang war between the Morettis and the Russians, all while wearing heels and bleeding out a 300-pound assassin. A dark, dangerous smile slowly spread across Cosimo's face. The realization settled heavily in his chest. He did not need to hide her in the shadows anymore. She was not meant to be locked away in a gilded cage. Isabella Coppola was a weapon, an apex predator, hiding behind a beautiful, plus-sized silhouette and a soft smile. They were equals, but their moment of revelation was abruptly cut short. The encrypted intercom on Cosimo's bedroom wall buzzed with a harsh red light. It was Matteo, Cosimo's fiercely loyal second-in-command. Cosimo hit the speaker button. Matteo's voice was tight with adrenaline. He reported that the diversion in Brighton Beach had bought them time, but not enough. Corrado Moretti had realized the trap too quickly. A source inside the Brooklyn precinct had just confirmed that Corrado was personally mobilizing a heavily armed convoy. They were bypassing the docks, ignoring the casinos, and heading straight for the heart of the Barbieri Empire. They were coming directly to the Tribeca penthouse. The war had officially begun, and Corrado was aiming for the head of the snake. Cosimo's expression hardened into a mask of pure lethality. He turned to his closet, sliding away a false wall to reveal a massive, heavily stocked armory. He began to pull down tactical vests, loaded magazines, and a pair of customized automatic rifles. He operated with cold efficiency, his mind calculating choke points, elevator overrides, and sniper positioning. He ordered Matteo to lock down the building, flood the lobby with their best soldiers, and prepare for a siege. He turned back to Isabella, intending to tell her to lock herself in the penthouse's reinforced panic room. He expected to see fear return to her eyes. He expected her to shrink away from the impending violence. Instead, Isabella walked calmly past him. She bypassed the array of assault rifles and stepped up to a small biometric safe hidden behind a framed painting of the Amalfi Coast. Cosimo blinked in surprise. He had never told her that safe existed, let alone granted her the fingerprint access to open it. Isabella pressed her thumb to the scanner. A quiet beep echoed in the room, and the heavy steel door clicked open. She reached inside and pulled out a sleek, suppressed compact pistol and 2 spare magazines. She checked the chamber with a practiced, fluid motion, the heavy fabric of the oversized robe pooling around her bare feet. She turned to face Cosimo, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her expression set in stone. The tears were completely gone, replaced by the hardened resolve of a woman who had finally stopped hiding who she truly was. She looked at the man who worshipped her, the man who was about to tear the city apart to keep her safe, and she made her stance completely clear. She was not going into the panic room. If Corrado Moretti wanted to burn their world down, They were going to strike the match together. The heavy steel door of the biometric safe closed with a soft click, but in the silence of the master bedroom, it sounded like the racking of a shotgun. Cosimo Barbieri stared at the woman standing before him. The oversized plush robe draped beautifully over her lush curves, a stark contrast to the cold, matte black metal of the suppressed compact pistol gripped expertly in her hand. For a fleeting second, the ruthless Mafia boss could not comprehend what he was seeing. He had installed that hidden safe himself. He had coded it exclusively to his own biometrics. Isabella read the silent question in his eyes. She offered a small, razor-sharp smile that made Cosimo's pulse pound heavy in his throat. She explained calmly that she had bypassed the biometric scanner weeks ago, writing a backdoor script into the penthouse network, just in case his enemies ever breached the perimeter while he was away. She had known about his armory. She had known about the panic room. She had simply chosen to be ready, rather than be a victim. Before Cosimo could process the sheer brilliance of his accountant, the penthouse shuddered. A deep, concussive boom echoed from the floors below, vibrating through the imported hardwood beneath their feet. Corrado Moretti had arrived, and he was not bothering with stealth. The intercom crackled to life again, Matteo's voice shouting over the deafening sound of automatic gunfire. Corrado's men had driven a heavily armored transport truck straight through the glass facade of the lobby. The ground floor was a war zone, and a splinter team of Moretti's most lethal hitters had already breached the private elevator shaft, attaching explosive-shaped charges to the cables to force their way up to the penthouse. Cosimo moved with terrifying speed. He tossed Isabella a spare tactical earpiece, fitting his own into his ear. He instructed her to stay behind his line of sight, but he no longer spoke to her like a fragile civilian. He spoke to her like a lieutenant. They moved out of the master suite and into the sprawling, multi-level living area of the Tribeca penthouse. The space was a monument to modern wealth, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, floating glass staircases, and priceless marble statues. Tonight, it would be a slaughterhouse. Cosimo took up a strategic position behind a massive, reinforced concrete pillar near the elevator bank, his automatic rifle raised and steady. Isabella did not cower behind him. Instead, she slipped behind the sprawling granite kitchen island, immediately opening a hidden compartment that housed the penthouse's central environmental control terminal. Her fingers flew across the glass touchscreen with blinding speed. Through the comms, Cosimo heard the grinding screech of the elevator doors being pried open by crowbars and hydraulic spreaders. 10 heavily armed men poured into the foyer, dressed in dark tactical gear, sweeping the room with laser sights. Isabella did not hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the terminal interface. Instantly, the penthouse plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The ambient city light from the windows was abruptly severed as the automated blast shutters slammed down over the glass. But Isabella did not stop there. Using the smart home system, she triggered the high-fidelity surround sound speakers embedded in the ceiling, blasting a localized, ear-shattering frequency of pure white noise directly over the foyer. The Moretti hit squad staggered, dropping to their knees and clutching their ears as the noise scrambled their equilibrium. They were entirely blinded and deafened in a space they did not know. Cosimo stepped out from the shadows. Wearing specialized night vision goggles he had pulled from the armory, the darkness was his domain. He moved like a ghost, his rifle firing in short, controlled, silenced bursts. He dropped 4 men in a matter of seconds, their bodies hitting the floor with heavy thuds that were completely drowned out by the agonizing sound system. Isabella monitored the thermal imaging from the security cameras on her tablet. She called out through the encrypted earpiece, her voice smooth and devoid of panic. She guided Cosimo's fire, warning him of a hostile moving to his left flank, then another trying to crawl behind the ruined leather sofas. They worked in perfect, deadly synchronization. It was a macabre dance of violence and strategy, and Cosimo had never felt a deeper, more intoxicating connection to another human being. But Corrado Moretti had not come to New York to fail. A secondary explosion rocked the eastern wall of the penthouse. The blast blew a massive hole through the reinforced drywall, sending a cloud of pulverized plaster and thick grey smoke rolling across the room. The white noise system sparked and shorted out, plunging the room into a ringing, deadly silence. The blast shutters had been compromised, allowing the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights to filter through the dust. Through the smoke stepped Corrado Moretti. He was a tall, wiry man with a face scarred by years of vicious street fighting, his eyes burning with manic, drug-fueled energy. He was flanked by his 3 remaining elite bodyguards, all carrying heavy assault weapons. Corrado laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the ruined luxury of the apartment. He shouted into the dust, taunting Cosimo. He mocked the Barbieri boss for growing soft, for hiding behind his money, and for letting a fat, useless accountant handle his empire. Corrado boasted that Vance had likely made Isabella scream before he killed her at the gala, entirely unaware of the bloodbath she had orchestrated. Behind the granite island, Isabella's grip tightened on her pistol. The insult to her body, the same tired, superficial underestimation she had faced her entire life, no longer stung. It simply confirmed that Corrado was blind, and blind men were easy to kill. Cosimo emerged from the dust cloud, his face smeared with ash and a bloody graze across his cheek. He did not look angry. He looked completely, terrifyingly calm. He leveled his rifle at Corrado, but before he could pull the trigger, the 3 bodyguards opened fire. The air tore apart as hundreds of rounds shredded the penthouse. Cosimo was forced to dive behind a heavy mahogany dining table, wood splinters erupting around him like shrapnel. He returned fire, dropping one of the guards with a clean shot to the chest, but he was pinned down. Corrado advanced, using the suppressing fire of his men to maneuver closer to Cosimo's position. Corrado drew a massive silver revolver, his face twisted in a victorious sneer, preparing to execute the head of the Barbieri family. I was so focused on his ultimate prize that he completely ignored the soft, plus-sized woman rising from the shadows of the kitchen. Isabella moved with absolute silence. She did not charge into the open. She used the geometry of the room, keeping the heavy granite island between her and the remaining bodyguards. She stepped out exactly 3 feet behind Corrado's right shoulder, placing herself in his blind spot. Cosimo saw her. From his pinned position on the floor, he locked eyes with Isabella. In that split second, the air between them seemed to freeze. He did not shout a warning. He did not tell her to run. He gave her a fraction of a nod, an absolute surrender of control, a silent acknowledgement that his life was entirely in her hands. Isabella raised the compact pistol, her stance wide and perfectly balanced. She pulled the trigger. The suppressed shot sounded like a sharp crack of a whip. The bullet struck Corrado's right wrist, shattering the bone and forcing him to drop the heavy revolver with a scream of agony. Before the 2 remaining bodyguards could turn their weapons toward the new threat, Cosimo surged upward from his cover, firing his rifle and eliminating them both in a brutal spray of gunfire. Corrado fell to his knees, clutching his ruined wrist, his manic confidence evaporating into pure shock. He stared at the weapon on the floor, then looked up slowly, his eyes widening as they landed on Isabella. She walked forward, the heavy silk robe trailing behind her. She did not look soft, or helpless, or out of place. She looked like the angel of death. She stood over the kneeling syndicate leader, her dark eyes looking down at him with an expression of absolute, chilling indifference. Corrado choked on a mouthful of dust and blood, his gaze darting frantically between Isabella and Cosimo, who had walked up to stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Corrado sputtered, demanding to know where Vance was, demanding to know how a glorified bookkeeper had outmaneuvered a tactical strike team. Isabella leaned in slightly. She kept her voice low, a velvet whisper that cut through the ringing in his ears. She told him that Vance was dead in a coat closet, bleeding out from a severed artery. She told him that his backup teams were currently being hunted by the Russian Bratva in Brighton Beach, and she told him that he had made a grave mistake by thinking her size made her weak, and her silence made her stupid. Cosimo looked at Isabella, his chest heaving, his heart hammering against his ribs. The obsession he had carried for her had transformed into an unshakable, unbreakable devotion. He reached out and gently placed his hand over hers, the hand that was still aiming the pistol at Corrado's chest. He told Corrado that the Barbieri family did not just have a king. They had a queen. Together, their fingers pressed against the trigger. A final suppressed shot echoed through the penthouse, and Corrado Moretti collapsed onto the ruined hardwood, his reign of terror permanently extinguished. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. The smoke began to clear, drifting out through the shattered windows into the stormy New York night. Downstairs, the sounds of fighting had ceased. Matteo's forces had secured the building. The war was over before the rest of the city even knew it had begun. Cosimo took the pistol from Isabella's hand, flicked the safety on, and set it on a nearby table. He turned fully toward her, ignoring the blood, the ash, and the devastation around them. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his massive arms tightly around her lush, soft body. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, her breathing finally slowing down, her arms circling his waist in an unyielding grip. He buried his face in her dark hair, inhaling the scent of expensive bath oil and gunpowder. He murmured against her skin, swearing on his life, his soul, and his empire that she would never be hidden away again. She was no longer just the brilliant accountant of the Barbieri family. She was Isabella Barbieri, the undisputed queen of the New York underworld. And together, they would rule the city, an unstoppable force forged in blood, brilliance, and an utterly consuming love. If you were captivated by this intense, high-stakes Mafia romance and loved watching Isabella prove that true strength comes from within, please hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who craves dark romance with a fiercely intelligent, underestimated heroine and a ruthlessly devoted Mafia boss. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite plot twist, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, gritty, and completely unforgettable underworld tales. Stay tuned for the next upload.